this wasn't really a question mark, right? This was like, okay, well, the seller is going to pay me because that's kind of status quo, how it always was. Well, just because that's how it always was does not mean that's how it's going to continue being. In fact, that is not how it's going to continue being at all.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another session of Build Your Business with Brittany. I'm Brittany, a real estate agent, coach, and investor, and every Thursday at 2 p.m. we gather to share tips, strategies, and insights to help you grow your business to the next level. Whether you're a brand new agent or a seasoned pro, there's something in these trainings for you. Now let's jump into this week's topic.
Today we're talking about crafting contracts. And today specifically we're talking about your RPA, the Residential Purchase Agreement, and how to get your offer accepted. So we're going to be talking about some tips and tricks to actually get that offer accepted. Now, I do these about once a month where we're talking about crafting contracts, where we're really diving into how to fill out the contract, but not just how to fill it out. We're really diving into also how to make sure that you're getting across whatever you're getting across. What are the conversations that you need to have? What is the communication that you need to be doing? And so these are really important because especially as things change, we need to make sure we're on the forefront of getting these done and knowing exactly how to fill these out. So we're going to start off by talking about some common questions. Now, as I dive into this, some of these common questions are going to be answered actually in how we actually fill out the form. But I want to get our minds kind of wrapped around this and starting to ask some of these questions and then figure out how to answer these in the best way possible too. So I'm going to ask some of the questions that I get a lot as a coach and also from clients or things like that. So I'm gonna ask these questions, answer them, but then keep in mind that some of them might be answered by how we fill out the contract, the RPA. All right, so first and foremost, we have this question: how will I get paid? This is a big question right now because before this wasn't really a question mark, right? This was like, okay, well, the seller's going to pay me because that's kind of status quo, how it always was. Well, just because that's how it always was does not mean that's how it's going to continue being. In fact, that is not how it's going to continue being at all. So now what are the changes? What's come? So basically, there is no more status quo with the seller pays, the buyer's side, which remember, it's always been negotiable. And it's always really been that the broker pays the other broker. Well, now that has gone away. And really what it is that the buyer needs to pay the buyer compensation. The seller needs to pay the listing agent compensation. And the way we can do that is we can ask, if you're the buyer's agent, we can ask for the seller to pay for it. And we're going to talk once we get into the contract about how we write that out and how we request that. But the reality is that it's really going to be case by case. And this is what I tell my clients when I'm listing with them, is that it really comes down to what is your net amount. So when I'm working with a buyer, I'm going to tell them, hey, we're going to ask for the seller to pay for my commission. But what if they are asking me to do a lot more and maybe that percentage is going to be a little bit higher? So it may be the percentage that they're going to pay me is 3.5%. But if I go to the listing agent and I say, hey, will you pay the buyers 3.5%? They're going to laugh at me and say, absolutely not. Here's the most that we'll pay. Well, okay, now we're in a conversation at least. But we need to make sure that we understand that we can request whatever we want to request. But the reality is that on the listing side, they're going to have the conversation and say, okay, this person's asking for 2.5%. This person's asking for 3.5%. This person's asking for nothing. None of that matters until you actually do the math and figure out what is the net amount that is going to be what the seller wants. How much is that going to be? Because maybe the person who's saying, you don't have to pay for my buyer side commission, maybe that person is saying, well, we're going to offer much lower. Well, then the net might be lower, even though you're not paying for that. So you always want to think about nothing but net. We want to figure out what is the net. And this meeting is recorded, yes, and you can absolutely get it. Follow my YouTube channel because you get all the recordings on YouTube. So be sure to follow me there at Real Estate Made Easy with Brittany or Brittany HanduraRE Real Estate or BrittanyHanduraRE Real Estate. I don't know what it's at now. I'm trying to switch everything over to my new last name. Okay, so how do we get paid? We need to, number one, first and foremost, is we're gonna have to have a conversation with the listing agent. That listing agent needs to tell us, we need to ask basically, is your seller willing to give a concession? Now, currently on the MLS, there is a box that they can check to say, is the seller willing to offer compensation? Yes or no, or you can leave it blank. So if you see that they're yes, willing to offer that compensation, we can ask, what are you willing to offer? But if that were me, I would say, submit your offer. If I was the listing agent, I would say, go ahead and submit, and the client is gonna look at all their offers. So I'm not gonna tell somebody right away. So if I'm the buyer's agent, I'm gonna probably still ask that. What are they willing to consider? Or do you have any other offers that don't have that in there or that are going to be, you know, stand out against mine? I'm gonna be asking, how is my offer, my client's offer, compared to the other offers that you have? Because if your client really, really, really wants this house, maybe they're gonna need to offer more compensation. Maybe they're gonna need to say, okay, we'll pay you separately for the extra, but we're gonna ask the seller to pay for 2.5%, 2%, 1%, or nothing. So it's case by case. It really depends on how you want your client's offer to stand out. Now, keep in mind, this is very similar to in 2020, 2021, people were literally like donating their firstborn child because they wanted the house so bad. They were willing to offer $200,000 over asking, waive the appraisal, all of this kind of stuff. That's very similar. If we're in that type of market, then okay, it makes sense that they're saying, hey, we're gonna waive the buyer side compensation and the buyer's gonna pay me directly for that. However, in today's market, in my area at least, we're not really seeing that. We're still seeing a lot of sellers offering to pay the buyer side compensation. So how you will get paid is really dependent on your negotiation skills, because number one, there are going to be some agents out there who are not going to ask. They're not going to be able to negotiate for themselves and stand up for that. They're going to say, oh, your seller doesn't want to offer any compensation. They're not going to be able to go back to the buyer and have this conversation because they never had that conversation to start with. That's not going to be us. That is not a professional agent. So you will get paid. Nobody is saying you're going to do this for free. Some of the agents who are not going to last long might. They might do it for free. But that's not what we're saying here. We're talking about how are you going to get paid? You absolutely will get paid. And it's just a matter of who's going to do the paying, the seller side or the buyer side. Now, again, I'm going to show you what we're going to fill out on the form later on, but that's if you're asking the seller to pay for it. If you're not asking the seller to pay for it, then you're just filling out the BRBC. You're saying, hey, will you, buyer, you're going to pay for this. We agree to this. Yes. Yes, we're going to do that. And you're going to say, okay, I'm going to try and get the seller to pay for this. However, if they don't, then now that's on the buyer side. It comes out of closing costs, whatever it is. So you will get paid. And we will talk about how to phrase this if you're asking the buyer to pay for it. All right, next up, how do I get my offer accepted? So this goes to having the conversation with the other side. We have to make sure that we're having conversations, because just like in talking with your clients, real estate is a contact sport. We need to be face to face. We need to at least be talking on the phone to people. I have gotten many offers accepted just because I'm the only agent who calls and they say, wow, you're really nice. And I'm like, that's really why you're accepting this offer? That's crazy. But the reality is so many agents don't even pick up the phone. They just send in an offer and they say, hope it gets accepted. We need to pick up the phone, meet with them, talk to them somehow, and figure out what is it that your seller really wants? What is their highest value? Do they want a quick close? Do they want top dollar? Do they want it to go really smoothly and easily? Maybe they want a rent back. Whatever it is, we need to be figuring out what is the seller's motivation and how can your buyers line up to what they want. So how can your buyer needs line up to make sure that the seller's needs are also getting met? But we're never going to know that if we don't pick up the phone and have a conversation. Because maybe sometimes, and I've talked about this before, maybe the seller doesn't care about having the top dollar. Maybe it's that they really, really want to make sure that they have a rent back. Or right now I have a listing where the seller doesn't really care about what he's getting. He's just saying, I want it really smooth and I want a quick close. So he's willing to take a little bit lower to have a quick close. So you, as a buyer's agent, your job is to figure out what is it that that seller's really looking for so that you can write your offer and get it and actually get it accepted. How do I submit an offer? So this isn't, I put this question in here because this is a question that a lot of times people have when they are like, okay, I remember when I first got into real estate and I kept hearing from more seasoned agents that you have like a packet. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do everything via email. So I need to create this packet via email. And what I ended up doing was I literally like created a whole PDF packet with like divider pages and all this kind of stuff. It was great. It was beautiful. But if I received that today, I would be like, what is this person doing? They do not know what is going on. And so the reality is, how do we submit an offer? It's going to be a little bit case by case, because like I said, some of the more seasoned agents, a lot of the times they say, try and get face to face with the other agent and sit down to present the offer. So you can tell them, here's the benefits of all this. I say that's great. If I was the listing agent, I would say, absolutely not. I'm not sitting down with you, a random stranger, for you to like barrage me with why I need to accept this client's offer. So I'll say, go ahead and email it to me. So the way I always do things with these is I'm going to tell you how I do it. You take it and do it however you like. So submitting an offer, we're going to write our offer like we're going to talk about. And when we talk about it, you'll see that the RPA is in a bundle. So it's not just the RPA. It's not just the purchase agreement. It's the AD, it's a bunch of forms with it. And so we want to submit that whole thing, but a lot of times agents also put into that KW addendum, and they put into it like the water saving forms and all that kind of stuff. Don't do that. Only put the RPA bundle and send that in an email. Now, what I do, because we don't do buyer letters anymore, and you'll see in the RLA, the listing agreement, there is a section that says basically why we don't want to do buyer letters. It's to protect our sellers from fair housing discrimination and all that kind of thing. But there is an option for them to say, no, I hear what you're saying, but I still want to receive those buyer love letters. So if that's the case, again, we have a conversation. And if that listing agent tells me, yes, we're accepting buyer love letters, you better believe my clients are going to write one. In general, that has kind of gone away. We're not doing that anymore. I don't really see them very much at all, which is a good thing, because I tell, if they do come into me, I tell the other agent, nope, we're not submitting these. But we're going to be sending the RPA. There are a couple of things that you check off in the RPA that we'll talk about, where you say you're submitting the pre-approval, proof of funds, things like that. So anything that you say is attached, you want to send that in the email. So your pre-approval, proof of funds, if it's all cash, you want to send proof of funds of all cash, all of that kind of thing. But we're really not sending like too much. Once we get an offer accepted and get an escrow, that's when all the other paperwork is getting signed and filed away and all of that. We don't need to start off with all that. We just need the one bundle and then whatever needs to be attached. Now, what's key is that I've already had a conversation with the listing agent, of course, and then in the body of the email, I'm writing out, thank you so much for allowing my client to see the property. They love it. They see the potential. There's they're excited to grow their family, whatever it is. And I am in the body of that email going to put something personal about what they're excited about, because you are allowed to do that. And a lot of agents just forward that on to their clients. I don't, but a lot of agents do just forward it on to their clients. And so they're able to see a little blurb about like what these people are excited about and kind of tug at those emotional, those heartstrings. So I am going to write that in the body of the email. I'm also going to write the highlights of the offer. I'm going to say, we are offering, you know, a full price offer. We have 20% down. We're doing a 21-day close, yada, yada, whatever the highlights of the offer are, I'm gonna spell it out, because I don't want it to be too hard. I want it to be top of mind. I want the agents to really be able to see this and be like, oh yeah, this is a good offer. I want to make sure that my clients are seeing this and that they're understanding what the best points are of this offer. I'm spelling it out for them. They don't have to do any work. I'm telling them what the best points of this offer are. So that's how we submit an offer. That's how I submit an offer, I should say. I'm going to send it as an email, and then in the body, I'm writing, here are the specific things that are highlights. And I'm mentioning specifically anything that they have said that they really value. So if they want a rent back, I'm going to say my clients agreed to a 30-day rent back at, you know, however much or whatever. So I'm writing that in the body of the offer. How do I know if the seller is offering compensation? Another common question that I get. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about with how do we get paid? How do we know if the seller is offering compensation? Number one, well, first and foremost, we have a conversation with them. We say, is your seller willing to accept? Because sometimes in the MLS, you know, there's that button that says, are the sellers willing to offer compensation, yes or no? But remember, you can leave that blank. And so if you leave that blank, that doesn't necessarily mean no. It just probably means you need to submit. So we want to make sure that we are really making sure to understand. We want to have a good understanding of, are they willing to or are they not? And it shouldn't be just based on what the MLS says, unless the MLS says yes. But keep in mind, even that little checkbox might be going away. We may not see that forever. So we need to get comfortable with asking the listing agent, and specifically asking them about what else they have. If they have 15 other offers and 4 of them are saying, hey, we're going to offer full price and we're not asking for the compensation to be covered, well, then my offer, if I even want it to get looked at, needs to be better than that. So I need to go and have a conversation with my buyer again to say, is this house what you really, really want? If it is, this is what we're going to have to do. And then if the buyer is going to cover your compensation, they need to understand that from the beginning before even submitting an offer. So as the markets shift and as things change, we're going to see some things that are different with this. We're going to see some things change with this. But as of today, the most important thing are going to be the relationships that you have with the other side. So that's one of the reasons why it's really, really important to get to know other agents in your office, on your board, as you're, you know, walking through, selling houses, doing that kind of thing. And if you don't know them, like especially in the LA area, a little bit out here, but especially in the LA area, there are so many agents, so many agents. And half of them, probably more than half, only sell maybe one house a year, maybe. And so if that's the case, you're very likely to never run into this person ever again. If you're a full-time agent selling a lot, you're probably never going to see a lot of these people. And so that's why the phone call makes a really big difference. Because if you don't have any kind of relationship with them, you need to establish that rapport with the bare minimum, a phone call. We do not want to be having this type of conversation via text. I'm a texter and I would not do that. Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. We are in the mix of some changes. We are actually, 2 months into these changes having taken effect. We will continue seeing changes as the boards and everybody, as CAR figures out what works, what doesn't for these forms. So we need to be flexible with it too. What we need to be dedicated to is our growth. We need to make sure that we are continuing to grow. All right, so let's talk about crafting this contract. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at our RPA. All right, so I have pulled up here zip forms. So I personally use zip forms mainly for creating the templates. And so that's gonna be up here, these templates. Okay, hold on, please. Let's see if I can make this any bigger.
Okay, before we jump to the next topic, I want to remind you that if you're looking for even more real estate resources like a social media content calendar or an open house roadmap, visit the link in the description below because I have just that for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you get more videos just like this as soon as they come out. Now let's keep going with today's training.
Templates, yes, okay. So these templates up here, basically when you change your templates, it's gonna change everything else in your document. So I'm not gonna create a template right now. What I'm gonna do is I have opened up a new sample document or sample, what is it called? Room. And I'm gonna show you basically from scratch. So what I wanna do, so I want to show you a couple of shortcuts just to make your life easier. First and foremost is that template. Secondly is this MLS Connect right here. This MLS Connect button will connect you to a live listing. And when you're connected to that listing, you're going to be able to pull all of the information from the MLS, which makes things so much quicker and easier. All right, so I clicked on that. I'm going to go to CRMLS. All right, so let's go to this detail. So I have a listing that I'm just going to pull the MLS number from, pop it in here. I'm going to say yes, include the photo just so that I can make it easier and say find it. All right, and it found it. It has the right photo, so I know that's the right one. This is saying we'll replace all the existing information. Yes, we want to do that. And now these are from my templates. You can ignore a lot of these. We're just going into the California Residential Purchase Agreement. So I'm going to click on that. And now remember, you're going to get a bundle. So the very first thing you see is not going to be the RPA. The very first thing you see is this AD form, the Agency Relationship Disclosure. This is basically saying, hey, I might be representing both sides. I might be representing seller, buyer, whatever. Now, as we go through this, I am not going to explain every line to you. I'm not even going to explain a majority of it. We're talking about how to actually fill it out. So it's your job to go through and read every single line of this. As new forms come out, that's literally what I do. I go through and I read absolutely every bit of it. And if I have any questions, I'm going to a training, I'm asking my brokers, I'm doing something to figure out any questions that I have. Because when I go and hand somebody a 16, 19-page document and they have questions about it, I better be sure I don't have those same questions. I want to make sure that I know I've seen this stuff and I know the answers to these. Okay, so we're gonna go down here. Now, this is the first part where we are gonna start filling stuff out. So when we talk about doing your templates, you can see that some of my stuff is already filled out here. That's because this is in my templates. So the real estate broker is already in here, their DRE number, then my name and my license number. All of this is already in here, so I don't have to do it every single time. The other thing that I would normally do is I would click this box for buyer because a lot of times the check boxes are what we miss. So let's put in here buyer Betty, and buyer Betty's buying by herself. She is a strong, confident woman. So she is buying by herself. And so we don't need to check this box for the buyer. We don't need to put anything else in for buyer too. And as we continue down, we're going to see that we don't ever need to put buyer Betty in here again. So she's already in, and that also makes it a lot easier. This is also one of the reasons why I don't print things out just to handwrite everything. I might print some pages out so they can have like a physical copy to look at. But in general, I'm saying, hey, let's figure out how to use DocuSign together. All right, so now we come to the actual RPA, the actual purchase agreement form. So we're going to do the date prepared is the date that you're preparing it. Remember, this does not have to be the same date as the date that it's signed. The date that it's signed is the date that it's actually active and live. So what we're doing is today's date, whatever date that we're actually writing the offer. Now, of course, if you're writing the offer today at 10 p.m. and you know your seller is not going to even see it until tomorrow morning, then by all means, fill out that date as the next day. But you don't want to fill out the date for like a week from now or a week ago. That date prepared, basically what this goes back to is when you have an addendum or have something else that is in relation to this document, it's going to say the date that it was prepared, and that's this date that you're putting in. So you can see buyer Betty is already here because we already wrote it in up top. Now you can also see that we already have all of this information in here that we didn't have to write in. The address, the APN number, all of this good stuff. That's because we did that MLS Connect shortcut. So if you don't do that, you can get all this information off the MLS. It's no problem, it's easy, you can find it, no big deal, but it makes your life so much easier. And I am all about smarter, not harder. So it makes your life so much easier to do that MLS Connect. Then we have that agent is in my same brokerage. So this means that it's going to be a dual agent. So normally with my templates, I have marked off this, I check this for the seller's this person's representing the seller. I check this box for this person's representing the buyer. But in this case, I'm going to check this box that says both the buyer and seller are represented by the same brokerage. So it's dual agency. Remember, dual agency doesn't just mean it's you on both sides. It means that it's one brokerage. Okay, so we have here that it's dual agency. So we're good with that. And then this down here just says more than one brokerage is representing either the buyer or the seller. So again, you find that out in the MLS, and then you do that additional broker acknowledgement form. If that is the case for the sellers, a lot of times you can fill out that ABA form later. You don't have to fill it out with this RPA necessarily. But if you, as the buyer's agent, are working with another person, like you're partnering up or you're on a team or something like that, you want to send that information in the beginning. But if the seller's doing it, they'll probably send it to you and you don't have to worry about that. Or your TC will catch that and they'll do that for you. Then here's where we start writing stuff in. And I will tell you where I would put stuff in the template so you can fill that out and make sure that it's done for you every time you do it. So keep in mind, this is the grid. This is the major thing that has changed. Now, what I love about this is that it really makes it much easier to walk through this with your client. So instead of saying, okay, purchase price is up here along with all this other verbiage, and then 3 pages later, we're going to talk about the close of escrow date, and then 3 paragraphs down, we're talking about the expiration. Everything that they need to know is right here. All of the important stuff is right here. And then of course, in here, this is the paragraph number. This is saying, okay, if you have any questions about that, refer down below to 5B. So let's scroll down to 5B. Here's 5B, all cash offer. If all cash offers specified no loan is needed to purchase, the agreement is not going to be contingent on the buyer obtaining a loan. So if they have questions about that, you can see that almost everything has an explanation down below. This just makes it so much easier. So I really have liked this new grid style. and they've changed the RLA to this new grid style, the BRBC. It makes things much easier, especially when you're communicating this with your clients. All right, so the purchase price, we're just gonna put a purchase price in here of $1 million. I'm not gonna say it's all cash because a lot of times we're dealing with a loan, so we wanna make sure that we're writing that in. Close of escrow, you can either say a number of days after acceptance, like 30 days, 21 days, 10 days, 45 days, whatever it is. But we are coming up on the holidays, and what we want to make sure is that we're not closing around a holiday because lenders get booked up, escrow gets backed up, title gets backed up. We want to make sure that we're giving plenty of time for all these people to get this deal closed. Remember, you can't close anything on a weekend. You can't close anything on a holiday. If the closing date happens to land on a weekend or a holiday, it doesn't get pushed up, it gets pushed back. And so if that holiday is a Monday, your clients might have been expecting to close on a Friday. Now they're not closing until Tuesday. So we just want to be sure that we put a specific date in here. So let's say the 31st. I always like to close on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, because that gives us extra time in case like, oh, the loan didn't get funded on time, or they didn't send docs on time, or they didn't wire it in on time, or whatever. It gives us an extra day before the weekend. If we close on a Friday, anything like that happens, now we're moved to the next business day. So that's why I always say Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. You could close on a Monday too, but Monday's like everybody's coming off the weekend and all of that. So, you know, it's whatever you wanted to do. You absolutely could write this in as 45 days, 30 days, whatever it is. It is totally up to you. And a lot of times agents get thrown off when you put a date. I don't know why, but agents are like, wait, what? So is there a reason you want to close on that date? And then I explain it to them and they say, oh, okay, that makes sense. But to make it easy, you could just put a number of days, but coming up on the holidays, you want to be careful. Expiration of offer, 3 calendar days is the default. So I generally leave it at that unless I want my offer to be responded to within 24 hours or really quickly. If there are lots of other offers and I'm trying to get this offer accepted, not trying to get on their bad side, if I'm trying to make sure, you know, like everything's good, I'm not going to write anything in. But if we're getting in early and there aren't, you know, like there are potential offers coming in, maybe that's when I would want to push them along and say, hey, I want a response sooner. So this is up to you about how to get this accepted, because this expiration of offer, while the default is 3 calendar days, if you change that, it really means something. It really makes people feel a certain way. Because it really says like, hey, I want to push this faster and I want to make sure that you are responding to us. So you have to be careful about it because it can put a bad taste in the listing agent's mouth. So 3 calendar days is sufficient. Most of the time I leave this blank. Initial deposit is typically 1 to 3%. We don't generally go over 3% just because 3% is a max amount that a seller can collect, even if the buyer ends up canceling on, you know, day at the 11th hour, all their contingencies are removed, everything like that. Even if it's fully on the buyer, the seller can only collect a max of 3%. Now, as far as what they're putting down, that is pretty much the standard, is the 3%. So what is that, 10,000? No, that's 10%. No, 30,000 is 3%. Okay. So they're putting down $30,000. If they're putting down a 3% initial deposit or earnest money deposit, EMD, that is telling the seller that you're serious, that your client wants to move forward. If you put lower than that, a lot of times the agent is going to come back and say, is there a reason why it's lower? I have these other offers that have higher earnest money deposits or EMDs. So it really is up to you about like how much do they want to get this accepted and how much do they have? Sometimes if they're buying a condo and they're only having to put 3% down, they just simply might not have that or want to put all of that down because they're really like tight there. So, you know, but again, it tells a story. As we create and craft this RPA, it's telling a story. So if I only put 1% down and I say, that's all my client has, that tells me a story. It tells me maybe they can't afford this house. Maybe we're going to run into issues. Maybe they're not going to be able to close. So 3% is generally what you want to put. And then over here is additional terms. This says within 3 business days, or if you want to put something else like 5 days or whatever. And it says after acceptance, 3 days after acceptance by wire transfer. So if this is the default. So if they wanted to do a cashier's check or something like that, you would have to write that in. And generally escrows aren't taking that anymore. Generally they're saying wire only, just because there's fraud that can happen. There's fraud that can happen all over with everything, but wiring is the default way of doing things. This increased deposit, this is like if, for instance, if you're saying, hey, we are going to put an initial deposit of $30,000, but we're also going to give you $10,000 that is non-refundable. You can keep it. If we cancel, you can keep this. You don't see that too often, but that's what this would be for. If you're saying, here's an extra amount that can be given, and this says upon removal of all contingencies or on a specific date. Now, keep in mind, this initial deposit is for the purpose of guaranteeing the seller that the buyer is serious, because if they remove all contingencies and then decide to cancel, the seller can now collect on this initial deposit. However, as you'll see as we go later through this, the RPA is really designed to protect the buyer, because the buyer is the one who's putting all this money out. The seller, if everything falls apart, the seller still has a house as an asset. The buyer is the one who's really taking a lot of the risk. And so this whole contract is designed to protect the buyer. And so we want to make sure that we understand that and that we are writing this to protect our buyers as well. Now, the loan amount, let's say they're going to be putting, the loan amount, the loan amount is going to be 800,000. They'll put 20, no. Wow. 80%, there we go. 80% loan to value. So they're going to be putting 20% down. You can see here that it does some of the math for you. And so this says balance of down payment is 170,000. So realistically, their whole down payment would be 200,000, but that initial deposit goes toward their down payment. And so the balance of their down payment is only 170,000. And then it says the purchase price total is $1 million. So as long as these numbers all add up, you're good. But double check that, because a lot of times I see a lot of contracts come through where these numbers don't add up. And I'm like, wait, what? Where are we trying to get here? So you want to just make sure that this is right. Now, again, over here, this is conventional. It defaults to conventional, or it says, or if checked, FHA, VA, seller financing, etc. So it defaults to conventional. If it's conventional, you don't have to worry about checking anything else. But if it is FHA or VA, you need additional forms. If it's seller financing, you usually also need like documentation spelling that out, exactly what they're agreeing to. Okay, and then down here under going back to this loan amount, so we're putting 80% down. This is saying the default is it's a fixed rate or initial adjustable rate, not to exceed a certain amount, buyer to pay up to a certain amount of points to obtain the rate. This, I don't ever put anything in here. And you'll hear from different people to put different things, like especially this by not to exceed a certain percentage. And that's especially because when interest rates were going up and up and up, they wanted to make sure that if it went higher than, 7%, 8%, that their clients were not expected to still try and get this loan if they're priced out. In my opinion, they can't get the loan, so that means that their loan contingency would still be in play. So I feel like you're protected either way. So in general, I don't really fill this out. Sometimes, especially if we're really volatile in our interest in the mortgage interest rates, sometimes I'll put something like that there. But again, the cleanest offer is often the strongest. And so the less of this kind of stuff you put in, the cleaner your offer is going to be. That's how you're going to get your offer accepted. If VA or if FHA or VA is checked, deliver the list of lender required repairs 17 days after acceptance, especially because it's conventional. We don't need to worry about that. But even if we are doing VA or FHA, this default is already 17 days. So we're good. Additional financed amount. This is when like second loans were a big thing. We don't have a ton of that right now. I don't really see that. So we don't need to write that in. Occupancy type, the default is primary, or if checked, it'll be secondary or an investment. Keep in mind that if you have an income producing, if you're putting an offer on an income producing investment property, there is a separate RPA for that that talks more about like tenants in place and all of that kind of stuff. But if they're buying a regular single family home and they're just using it as an investment, this is the form you would use. All right, let's keep going. All right, here's where we get to the seller credits. So seller credits, you remember, we're specifically looking at this with the eyes of how do I get my offer accepted? Now, I would never ask for a seller credit if I hadn't already talked to the agent to say, would your client be open to this? Specifically, we want to make sure, you know, like, we don't want to make sure. What am I trying to say? If you have a multiple offer situation, they're less likely to accept something with a seller credit. If it's been sitting for a long time, they might be willing to do it because now this is how they're enticing people to buy this property. So the seller credit is really to be used very carefully. You want to make sure that you've had that conversation, that you know that the seller is aware of it, that you know they're going to be accepting it or something. This seller credit is not where we put the buyer agent compensation. We'll see that below. So this seller credit is if they say, hey, I want the seller to pay for my closing costs. When I bought my first house, that's exactly how I did it. I said, how about we offer a little bit more, but I want the seller to pay my closing costs. And they agreed to that and it was great. It was a different time, but you don't see this as much, but I absolutely see it in some areas, in some markets, in some, more so like the lower price point areas, we see a lot of the seller credits being accepted. So this is just something that you want to be sure you have that conversation about. And then of course the seller credit is usually always applied to the closing costs, but if you have something else, you can just say other here. And then additional finance terms. This is going to be if like, well, I'm thinking like if you were to put seller credits or something like that, or maybe the appraisal. No, that comes later because they've changed that. This is just if you have other financial terms that you're putting in. This is going to be totally like a one-off off the wall thing because they really have like looked at all the things that people would write in and they've included this in this document now. So there's not a lot that you would say. Now here is where we get to the buyer broker compensation. Seller agrees to pay the obligation of the buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. So you check this box and then you will get the SPVB. Now I have heard rumblings that in the updated RPA in December, we are going to have this built into the RPA. So we won't have a separate box, it'll all be in there. And so we don't have to worry about that, which in my opinion is a really good thing because I don't know why it's a separate document right now. But remember I was saying, you're agreeing to pay the buyer's obligation. So it's not broker to broker compensation. It's the seller is willing to pay the buyer's obligation. And in the BRBC, it's spelling out, hey, the buyer's obligation is to pay the broker. So it's not broker to broker, it's seller to buyer, but that's just semantics, just to throw that out there for you. And then we have here verification of all cash, verification of down payment and closing costs, verification of loan application. All of these are defaulted to accepted or attached to the offer, or you can write in 3 days or 5 days or 2 days or whatever after acceptance. Now, again, remember what I said about a clean offer, you're not writing all this stuff in. If I am a listing agent and I see, oh, you don't have the verification of funds attached, I'm not getting this in the initial email, that's going to be a red flag to me. So you want to make sure as the buyer's agent that you have all of this. You have the pre-approval, you have the down payment. If it's all cash, you have all of the proof of funds, because you need to make sure that you're sending it with any offer that you're submitting. That's how you're going to have a stronger offer. And then over here for the loan application, pre-qualification, you don't want that. You do not want just a pre-qualification. You want a pre-approval or a fully underwritten pre-approval. Sometimes you'll see in the MLS that the listing agent will say, submit a DU. That's a desktop underwriting. That's the desktop underwritten pre-approval is really what it is. That's this, fully underwritten pre-approval. So if you say, I have a DU, you check this fully underwritten pre-approval. What that is it goes deeper. So level 1 is the pre-qualification where they're on the phone saying, oh yeah, I make this much money and I have all these assets. I have no debts and all that kind of stuff. Number 2, the pre-approval is they're verifying that with basically a credit check. The fully underwritten pre-approval is when they're saying, yes, we know they're employed. We have some pay stubs from them. We have verification of their assets. We've seen their debts. Yes, they are fully approved. That is going to be the gold standard. But a pre-approval is typical. And so a lot of times you'll just see the pre-approval and that's okay. You don't want to see a pre-qualification. So if that's all you have, you as the buyer's agent want to be going to that lender to say, hey, what do you need to get that pre-approval? Because they want to submit an offer. We need to make sure that we're moving forward with this thing. Final verification of condition. Remember, we have all these defaults. The defaults are I usually leave the defaults as is. So 5 days prior to close of escrow is when you do that final walkthrough. Assignment request. This is if you're saying, hey, I'm going to be assigning this, like a wholesaler might do this. I'm going to assign this to somebody else who's the final buyer. Not super common, but the default is 17 days. So we just leave it blank. The loan contingency is 17 days. And remember, these are when the contingencies end. These are the timeline for your contingencies. So but all contingencies need to be proactively removed. They don't just expire. So if you're the listing agent, you better be keeping track of these contingency timelines and requesting that they submit or give them a notice to perform, because we want to make sure that we're doing this. A lot of agents don't do that. And a lot of agents just say, oh, I'm talking to them. It's fine. No big deal, which is okay too. And if I'm the buyer for that, then I'm not going to submit my contingency removal until we are fully ready. So we have the 17-day loan, 17-day appraisal. Here's where you could write in. Remember, I kind of was thinking that financial terms might be the appraisal thing. No, they've changed that and added it in down here. So it says appraisal contingency based upon appraised value at a minimum of the purchase price, which is what we're offering, or a specified amount. So if you say, I'm willing to buy that, I'm going to offer $1 million, and this is only listed for $925. I'm going to offer more. I'm going to offer $1 million, but it has to appraise at least at $975. And so now you're building that in, and you can say it has to appraise. I'm still willing to pay more for it, but it has to appraise at a certain threshold. So that's where you would put that in. But again, when people were offering 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 over asking and waiving their appraisals, they would not have gotten their offer accepted had they written something like that in.
They're saying like, I'm totally fine to not have any of this. In general, we're not writing that unless you're like really trying to get this accepted and the market shifts and this is where we are now. But right now, where we are in our market, that's not where we are. So it's a default of 17 days. You could lower this one. Oftentimes I do. But one thing to remember is that if you need to order a rush appraisal, like if the lender needs to order a rush appraisal, it's going to be more expensive for your clients. They have to pay for that. And a lot of times it's like way more expensive. So you just need to be aware that if you shorten that timeline, it could cause an extra payment for your clients. Here's where we would remove that appraisal contingency, but it's saying removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in FBAC. That's going to be the other documents that's saying basically like, oh, well, if it doesn't appraise, then we can't get the loan. So therefore we can remove the appraisal contingency. You can't do that. If you're removing the appraisal contingency, you're saying we can still get the loan even if the appraisal doesn't come through. Investigation of property, I always do shorten this one just because we can always get those inspections done really quickly. And anytime you shorten these timelines, that's going to make the offer stand out and look stronger. So I usually, you can see this was already written in, that was in my templates because I always usually shorten it to 10 days unless they're out of the country and they're not going to be able to come in or something like that. Then we have informational access to the property. So this is basically, you can go in, but it's, well, let me read it because it says, buyer's right to access the property for informational purposes only is not a contingency and it does not create cancellation rights and applies even if the contingencies were removed. So this is basically saying like the buyer can, like we are removing our inspection contingencies 10 days in, but the buyer can still come in and take measurements and do what they want, maybe bring in a roofer or something like that to give them an estimate. But once that 10-day inspection contingency is signed off on, they cannot use that as a contingency, use this access to the property as a contingency because they found something they didn't like. You need to use that inspection time before you sign off on your contingency because this access to the property is totally separate. Insurance, this is the new one that was added, and this is a really good one because especially in California, it's been very challenging to be able to get insurance. And so this is just saying that they are able to get insurance at a cost that they approve of. So it's not saying that they're able to get insurance because maybe it's cost prohibitive for them. Maybe the insurance is so expensive that now they can't get the loan that they wanted to. So now insurance is a separate contingency for them. Review of seller documents, all this is fine. And it's all a default of 17 days. If you remove any of these, then that's when you're going to attach your CR, which is your contingency removal. So if you say no loan contingency, no appraisal, you don't need to have the CBR yet. Actually, that's not true. You do L1 through L8. So any of these, you would have the contingency proof, the CR attached. This is the sale of buyer's property is not a contingency. That's the default unless it's checked. So if you're saying they have to sell their property before they can buy this one, this is where you check the box. And then on this COP form, that's when you say it's in escrow, it's not in escrow, it's listed, this is the agent, all of that kind of good information. Again, does not make for a super strong offer. So that's the conversation to have with your clients. If we want the strongest offer and know that we're doing this, we don't want to have our house, we don't want to have this contingent on the sale of another property. Of course, a lot of times that has to happen, but what we want to make sure is that they're at least under contract or at least it's listed. What you're almost never going to be able to do is say, hey, we haven't even taken pictures yet, but they're going to sell their house and we want to buy this one. And it's contingent on that one selling, but it's not even listed yet. We're talking about how to get your offer accepted here. Time of possession, the default is upon notice of recordation. So it used to be at like 6 p.m. on the night that it closed or something.
Now it's upon notice. So a lot of times it comes in at like 10 a.m. That is the time of possession. So the seller needs to make sure they are out before that day realistically, because it's going to be in the morning or in early afternoon probably. You can write in a different time and date, but I always leave this blank. Seller, occupied, or vacant units. Most of the time with residential, we don't have to necessarily worry about that. However, if we're talking about, remember we said that maybe the seller wants a rent back, maybe the seller wants some extra time. If they want 25 or fewer days, you can put that. Maybe they say they want like 2 weeks to be able to move because they're moving across country, whatever. That's where we're going to put this in, and we're going to say, yes, we're willing to let the seller stay there. We fill out a different form, but remember in the body and the highlights, in the body of your email that you're sending, this is a highlight. You want to be able to say, we are willing, we're very flexible, we're willing to let the seller stay, because that's kind of buried in here. Tenant occupied property addendum, that's if it's occupied by tenants. And then documents, this is all saying it's 3, 5, or 7 days to get documents to the sellers or from the sellers. So we're good on all that. Any questions before we keep moving on? So now here's where we get to the items included. This is where I would have some things checked off on your template so that you don't have to do it every time, because most of the time we're going to ask for anything that is affixed. So your stove, your dishwasher, if it's a built-in microwave, and very often we're asking for refrigerators too. Now that you'll find that in the MLS a lot of times. If they want to take their refrigerator with them, they will say that that is excluded. So then you don't want to have that on your RPA, because they're just going to have to counter back and say, well, no, we already said that they wanted to take them. Video doorbell, security camera, any of these smart home control might be like a Nest or something like that, like for the AC and that kind of thing. That I would ask for because it's affixed. But if they have something like a video camera that is just plugged in, you want to make sure that you're clarifying with your client, like this kind of stuff they'll take, but if it's built in, that should be sold with the house, unless everything's negotiable. So unless they decide that. So a lot of this stuff I would have in my templates, because it's basically, you know, a lot of homes at this point are going to have this kind of stuff. So you want to make sure that you have them. And side note, if you have a listing and your seller is saying, well, I don't want to sell, like actually a good example, I have an upcoming listing appointment where the seller was already telling me, well, I have this tree that is sentimental to me. And so like a small tree. So should I take it out of the ground? What do you call that? I don't know. And I said, yes, absolutely. You want to take that out of the ground and put that in a pot, because anything that is in a pot, a buyer would expect that that goes with you. Anything that is planted into the ground, a buyer would expect that staying. So you want to make sure that anything that you do, if you're like, oh, this is my grandmother's chandelier and I can't live without it, take it down, put up a cheap little fan before we go to market, because you don't want a buyer to come in and fall in love with that chandelier just to find out, oh, it's not included. So that doesn't happen that often, because sellers are buying more than just a chandelier, but you want to make sure to have those kind of conversations. Now, here's where I have a lot of stuff that is already filled out because of my templates. So a lot of these allocation of costs are going to be on the seller. Most of the time, a lot of these are on the seller. But one thing that people are kind of like curious about are when we're asking for government required point of sale, corrective or remedial actions. So example, there was a listing that had some violations that were on title, like permit violations that were on title. And if we were to, so I was the listing agent, if I got an RPA that said this, I would have to counter back and say, nope, we already know that there are issues that need to be taken care of. Your buyer needs to take care of that instead of the seller. So you just have to know what you're getting yourself into. But in general, I'm asking for the seller to pay for that. And if they push back, I say, well, tell me what. Tell me what you know that the buyer would not agree to. And if they say, well, I just don't know, but we can negotiate that later, then I say, okay, counter it out, or let's just agree to negotiate to it later. Now, of course, you want everything in writing. So if they wanted to counter it out, they could. But in general, I'm going to have the seller paying for most of these things. Escrow, each pays their own. Title, seller usually pays. HOA documents, transfer stuff, the seller usually pays that. And there are some things here that like are defaulted and you can't even change it. Buyer, lender, title, insurance policy, that's on the buyer. HOA fee for prepping disclosures, that's always on the seller. HOA certification is always on the buyer. So there are some things that you can't change and that's good. But for the most part, if there are transfer fees or things like that, that's what the seller is going to pay for. Then we have our home warranty. Home warranty is a really good one to be able to use for like saying, oh, the buyer is going to get their own, or we're not going to ask for a home warranty, because it just is it like lets your offer stand out just a little bit, because you're saying, hey, we're going to take basically $750 off of the fees that your seller has to pay. But again, this is market specific. So if you are in a market where it is not a super, super strong seller's market, then it's okay to leave this. I would leave this and just say, yeah, in general, the seller pays for this. So I'm going to leave that as is. Now, other terms. This is where we might put in an escalation clause or something like that, where we're saying purchase price is to be $5,000 over the next verified offer, up to a certain amount. Or you could just say, you don't have to say up to a certain amount, although I always would. Now, pros and cons to this, you're showing your cards. That's a con. You're showing your cards. You're saying, hey, this is what we're willing to pay. But the pro to this is that your offer is going to stand out. Your offer is going to be higher than whatever anything else is. I use escalation clauses sometimes. Mostly when they say just submit your highest and best. If they're not telling me anything, if they're not giving me any information, then I'm going to do an escalation clause. But if they're telling me, yeah, we have a couple other offers, yours is the highest so far, I think if you do that, you'll probably be good. Great. Then I can just submit a regular offer. If I do an escalation clause, I'm always putting it in the body of the email, because that, again, kind of gets buried down here. And I want to make sure that they're seeing it. The rest of this is just if you have other specifics like probate, manufactured, anything like that, that's going to be an additional addendum. Mark this here. This is the kind of stuff, this backup offer addendum, septic, well, property, blah, 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 blah. All of this kind of stuff, I'm not checking unless I have to, because I don't want that offer to come through and it be 900 pages. I want to only do the things that are required, which are the things that are checked off here, and I can't do anything about it. So as we go through, the rest of this is just read and sign. So make sure you're reading it. And then we get to this bottom part. This is if it's entity buyers, LLC, corporation, that kind of thing. This is where your clients are going to sign. And then here's where, if you're the listing agent, you're going to be checking this off, and then your listing agent is, your seller is going to sign. And then we have your information here. So again, this is where I would make sure that I have all of my information in my templates, because I don't want to have to write this every time. And this information, the seller's information, came from that MLS Connect that we did. So this is really much easier. Again, you can find it in the MLS, but I don't want to. I want to make sure that it's already in here ready to go for me. And then as we go, we see more that's in that bundle. And so you just need to make sure that they're reading and signing and send it off to them. And we've reached the end.
Don't forget, we're here every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Join me live by registering at the link in the description below and get your questions answered in real time. I love helping you succeed. Thanks for joining me for another Build Your Business with Brittany. Let's keep building, growing, and closing those deals. I'll see you next Thursday at 2 p.m.